welcome to Leading for Life Stories, Season 3. I'm Bob Judson, I'm the host for this podcast, and I'm absolutely delighted to have you here joining me. Regardless of whether you're a seasoned listener who's been with me since the beginning, or whether you've just dropped in for the occasional episode, I really hope you enjoy the mix of content that I provide, the personal stories, the thematic episodes, and the guests that I have on the show. And I hope you find it all interesting and at least some of it useful. And without further ado, let's go. Welcome back, everyone. This week, my guest is Mark Cheshire. Mark is a fantastic character, really senior banking man, spent 30 years in the banking industry, all in Lloyds Bank, rising to the top of it, becoming the CEO of the UK Private Bank, sitting on the board of the UK Retail Bank. Since 2012, though, he's been working for himself, running a consultancy and done a range of things in a portfolio-style career, but he majors on being an advisor to all sorts of organizations. He's an executive coach to a wide variety of different individuals from different sectors and has got just a wealth of terrific leadership experience and advice. And he was fascinating to talk to. It was a real privilege. He's a super senior chap. I know him through Lloyds University, where we've worked together a number of times on the courses that he helps with there as well. And it was a pleasure to talk to him. I really, really hope you enjoy the conversation that follows, because I think you'll find it fascinating. Off we go. Mark, thanks very much indeed for joining me on the podcast. It's a real privilege to have you on, and I'm looking forward to what I think will be a great conversation.
Me too, Bob. Thank you very much for having me along.
No, my pleasure. It's a delight. I mean, you've had an incredible career journey by any measure. You know, in the world of banking, you've gone right to the top of it. Obviously, ending up as a chief exec, and you've also done since then a lot more in terms of your own portfolio career. But could you just get us started off by giving us a resume of that and the summary of your journey so far, as it were?
I'd be delighted to, Bob. I had over 30 years of sort of corporate life, largely with Lloyds Banking Group, and then with a fairly small but very broken PLC. At Lloyds, I had a whole range of senior jobs, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And then the time came to move into a different sort of world about 2008, 2009. And as you say, it was more by luck than planned that a portfolio of business interests started to be put together. There were a couple of advisory boards. But I've moved into the world of sort of board level mentoring and coaching, got my accreditations. And today I'm very lucky. I have a portfolio of wonderful people at board and exco level, a whole range of businesses, fintech, banking and insurance, manufacturing, a central banker, head teachers in the public and private sector, a whole range of businesses, balance sheets, geographies, industry sectors. And I'm very, very privileged to be spending a lot of time with them.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? I mean, and I'm a coach myself, and I really think one of the valuable things as a coach is the different people you meet and the different perspectives you get. And I mean, I learn a huge amount from that, just about the industries they're in and what they do and so on. I think it's absolutely fascinating. I love that side of it.
I found that more, again, by luck than judgment, I've arrived at sort of 4 criteria in terms of where I'm going to spend my time and energy. Probably as a result of making a few wrong turns years ago, and you end up in situations that you think, I'm not quite sure if I'm adding anything here. But my 4 criteria is, first of all, chemistry's got to be right. You've got to connect with each other. Secondly, they and their organisation have got to have the right values. Third is I'm going to learn. I'm going to be challenged. And fourth, I'm 100% certain that I can make a difference. And I know I've got to get 4 out of 4. 3.5 out of 4 doesn't count. There'd be somebody better placed than me.
Yeah, no, and I think it's I think I've actually met quite a lot of coaches with similar value sets, if you like, and because I think it's really important that you recognize that you can't coach everybody. No. It just doesn't work sometimes, and if you're going to A, enjoy it, which is also important, and B, the whoever's being coached is going to enjoy it and get value from it, that chemistry piece is particularly important. I totally agree with you. It's got to work. But interestingly, I tend to, I don't know whether you're similar, maybe not, but I tend to almost avoid coaching people from the military or in transition out of the military in a formal coaching arrangement. I'll mentor them and give them some support, but I find it's really difficult to avoid straying into too much of a mentoring relationship if I'm doing coaching with someone who I kind of know an awful lot about what they do and I've been there myself.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I prefer the word mentoring or friend or advisor. You're creating a safe space where with your client, you can talk about anything.
Yeah, no, totally so. And like you, I mean, I've done chief constables and head teachers, and and exactly that. Because I think that one of the things I tend to major on, and you'll have been firmly in this position, is that loneliness of command thing.
Yeah.
If you're at the top of the organization, that's a lonely place to be, and actually having somewhere you can go, someone you can talk to, and an opportunity to kind of explore ideas, share stuff in a genuinely safe space. I think it is such a valuable thing for people at senior level.
Well, I quite agree. And we might talk more about it, in our session today. I recognize when I look back over the many years that there is always a common set of things you're feeling and common set of things you're thinking about all the time. And to your point around loneliness, after the excitement and of the challenge of having the top job, it is quickly followed by loneliness.
That's true too. Yeah, I mean, I did several times in the in my Air Force career. You'd go. In fact, I was having this conversation with someone just the other day. You get to right. What's my next aim point on the horizon? I'm going to be a squadron commander. I'm going to be a station commander. I'm going to be whatever. And you reach that, and you think, okay, what am I going to do now? And invariably, in Air Force terms, certainly, you'd finish doing something like commanding a station, and you'd go into by any stretch of the imagination, a very different job. Where you'd have a fraction of the people, you might have a lot of responsibility and a big role, but it was just a completely different world, and it wasn't a kind of command job. You were back in, swimming around with all the other big fish in the pond, and it was very different.
I find I quite agree. I find with the most senior of clients that constantly coming back to the question, what is the job? What is not the job? And what does success look like? Is time well spent?
No, totally so. I mean, keeping that, interestingly, principle of war number one,
Right.
selection and maintenance of the aim, is so applicable out to civilian world stuff as well. And it's such a good analogy for that. Coming back to you and particularly your earlier career, I mean, I tend to talk about early motivations with people, and I mean, you skipped over it really quickly, but you had a really impressive career in banking. So, what got you into that for a start, and just tell us a bit more about that kind of banking experience.
I probably fell into it by accident, but during the jobs fair coming out of university, I met somebody who's running the recruitment desk for Lloyds Bank, who was a big rugby person, and that's my big passion. I was pretty good at it, played a lot of representative rugby, and he seemed to recognise who I was and was telling me all about the bank's sports club and how you can have time to go and play more rugby. So I thought, well, this isn't too bad. I'll sign up probably for 6 months, get on the graduate scheme, and probably move on. Well, 30 years later, I found I was still there. So it was no big plan or vision. It was, and along the way, I had some great people who mentored me and were role models. My rugby coach was because he believed in me. My grandfather was because he was a great man. And then when I look into the world of Lloyds Bank, we were so lucky. There were so many special people. Sir Brian Pittman was our chief executive and then our chairman for many years, and just had the great common touch where everybody felt that they'd heard from him. We knew what the mission was, we knew what the goals were, and it was consistent over many, many years. So I was very fortunate. All sorts of different people on the journey.
Yeah, nice. How long did you keep up the rugby for?
Uh, well, 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 it's a good question. Mid-20s when the injuries started piling up. And if
Yeah,
you've got a career, you can't be coming in with a black eye or a broken arm the whole time. And I'm 5'8" and about 13 and a half stone. If you're running into somebody who's 6'8" and 18 stone, there's only one winner. So I hung my boots up. But then I made the big mistake of having a comeback. Never go back. It doesn't work.
Yeah, not in that sport, well, that's for sure. No, I've interviewed a couple of rugby players. Rory Underwood was one, and
Yeah,
Henry Arundel, obviously, at sort of
yeah,
different ends of the game. Rory having retired and moved on to
yeah,
do other stuff, but and we had a really interesting conversation because he was balancing an Air Force career and obviously his rugby career, playing right,
yeah.
right up at international level. And Henry, I mean, Henry's dad used to work for me, so that was where the connection came. We did that was the first one I did with two people on the podcast. It was great actually, and I think the interesting thing about that level of rugby particularly is the kind of professional game and the development of the professional game in all sorts of ways. I mean, the science of it in terms of the level of detail they go into with the analytics around it, the whole process that they're going through, but also actually the physical aspect of it, because it's become a really, really physical game now. I mean, it was always pretty physical, but I think at that level, they're tanks and and they take some big hits, don't they? It's a tough watch sometimes.
Yeah, it's much better from the settee.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah. I mean, as you know, the podcast is very much about leadership, and I tend to ask people about development, evolution of their own leadership
Yes.
style across time,
Yeah.
and whether that's unconscious, whether that's conscious. You in particular, you've gone through all those different layers in the same organization, which is challenging sometimes to do that. I'm just interested in how you adapted and what you did, what you saw in yourself as a change over time.
Yeah. We were very lucky. I started out in banking in 1980, which is a long time ago, with a bank that invested a lot of its time and money in developing high potential individuals. And you get sent to business school. I was lucky enough to be sent to Kellogg in Chicago, to Said, to Judge, to many of the business schools. And they were very special experiences because at a young age you start getting a view of the bigger picture. I took a secondment to the Bank of England to support in banking supervision. So you get at this kind of horizontal cut of what the whole industry is looking like. So there were lots of interventions and support along the way. And then you watch people who are really smart and do it really well. And then you watch people who aren't smart and don't do it well. And you learn from all of that. I'm quite competitive. I like to win. I like to win in the right way. So I quite enjoyed those sort of turnaround situations where people will say it's been tried before, it can't be done. You don't take that role. Those are always the best ones to take.
Yeah,
And along the way, I had three or four of those situations, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I found that um, many things I can't do, but some of the things I can do fairly well is bring 100% of my attention, a laser beam focus on issues and not get distracted,
yeah.
put my energy in the right places and have the courage to say no because you're saying yes to the higher purpose.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And very interesting what you said about examples, good and bad, because that's something I tend to use quite a lot when I'm training people. I have a sort of metaphorical two jars. I have one jar that's full of things that I liked and I've done myself that I've found successful, or that people I've seen doing things that I've really enjoyed, or that I've worked for them, or I've seen them in action, or whatever. But I've got another jar which is all the other stuff. It's the mistakes I've made. It's the things that I've seen other people do that I kind of go, I never ever want to be like that.
Yeah.
And I find that a really useful just metric for me personally to work to, because it gives me, and it's definitely shaped me in terms of some of the styles that I've got, and I've shamelessly plagiarized, stolen, whichever you want, ideas and practices of people that I think are really good role models, and dismissed and not accepted in my team as well. Actually, some of the behaviours that I think are just really toxic in leadership, and sadly there are too many of those.
Yeah, quite right. Being a role model, people, people watch you, people clone you. People use the same words. They reward the same things. It's very interesting, that whole piece of it's not just words, tone of voice, and body language that are all joined up.
Yeah, and you can commit thought crime, I think, as a leader as well. I mean, it just as you say, just in the way you act and your initial response to things. Some of the time, I remember, vividly, one of the things like when I was a station commander, I could walk around we used to do inspections of the various sections on the base just to go and, A, meet the people, B, just see that everything was going on, going as it should be, and give them an opportunity to air stuff up to the kind of top level that otherwise they wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity to do. And some of the time you'd walk around and you'd make a comment about something almost sort of en passant, not really thinking too seriously about it. And the next thing is you'd go back a few weeks later and it had changed. And you go, well, what happened? They said, well, you didn't like it. And I didn't actually mean it. I wasn't thinking of it like that.
Yeah.
So I had to learn to be quite, wary of exactly that, that people can turn around and make assumptions about what you want rather than actually you explicitly having asked for it to be done that way.
You're quite right. I recall those situations as well. I mean, you have to have courage. You have to have courage to slow down. There'll always be a crisis. That someone's always going to want your time. Slow down and go big. You're there to make the weather, not just look after the shop. And it requires, some good, high quality thinking about what being a rainmaker is all about.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think on the slow down point, the other thing I think is really important is to organizationally keep the temperature at a manageable, sustainable level, recognizing that you'll have to make it hotter some of the time because you've got some crisis you've got to deal with. But if you've got it already running at maximum heat, it's really, really hard to do that. Yeah. And so having the confidence, I think, as well, to turn around and go, right, we're going to row back rather than just keep on pushing, which is, I think, is a danger of lots of organizations.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, role models wise, who have you got any sort of names you can throw out there personally that you that will really help shape you?
Yeah, so early in your career, there's always somebody who gives you a bit of air cover, takes a chance on you, gives you a bigger project than you think you've got the capability or capacity to handle, and you grow, you fly. There are a number of people in that space for me. I can recall it going on a program by the Windsor Leadership Trust at St George's House, where you bring together people from all walks of life. And I think in my syndicate, we had people from military, from armed forces, from the not-for-profit sector, as well as from business. And I shall never forget this gentleman. He was, I think, the Church of England's Bishop of Bradford at the time. So he had a pretty tough patch to look at. And what shone through, and I kept in touch with him for many years, was his ability to find common ground, stay cool, stay calm, listen, be gentle, but be firm. And it was an incredible skill. And I've never forgotten what I learned from him for sitting in the same syndicate for him for many years. I went to see him in Bradford, actually, and he took me around in his little car, his patch. It was a tough old patch. And he was a wonderful man. So there were people like that you're blessed with spending time with on your journey.
Nice. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it, how often you can meet people. I mean, obviously you meet people in your own business, whatever that is, and who shape you and who you're working with, and who will give you a kind of a literal role model to follow that you can clone, to use your word a minute ago. But I've also had exactly the same experience where I've worked a few times on leadership exchange type schemes. There's a good friend of mine still to this day. I've done a podcast with him actually called Phil Crossman, who rose to be the chief exec of Honda UK. And he was the head of sales for Honda UK when I was a station commander. And we did this swap thing where I went to Honda, he came to Coningsby. And of course, they're completely different industries, nothing in common really that's obvious in terms of what we were doing. But yet the amount of things we could learn from each other was enormous, really valuable. And I think it's sometimes it's that not so obvious thing that is worth your time and effort to go and get a different experience and a different sort of lens to look through, because it really does make a difference.
You're absolutely right. Again, I was lucky enough to go on a cabinet office program called the TMP, Top Management Program, that again brought together, I think from the public sector, people were in much bigger jobs than those of us from the private sector at the time. So we had people from MI6 and there was a submarine commander and these sorts of interesting people. But the challenges we were all facing were pretty much the same generically. It was too much change, or change that has to happen quickly. How do you take your people with you? How do you manage stakeholders? How do you do it on a tighter budget? How do you deal with regulators? There's all of that goes into the mix.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, interestingly, and a sort of related theme, I suppose, when I started working for Deloitte full time after I left the Air Force, the very first engagement I did with Deloitte was with Barclays Bank. And I can still remember the partner that got me involved in it, who came up to me and said, "Hey Bob, we want to get you on a client engagement and get you more exposed." And so we've got this really high profile thing. It's all board and C-suite level with Barclays, and it's an execution risk review. So I'm kind of going mental note, right? What's execution risk? I need to go and look that up. and he was watching the color draining from my face, I think, because I then said to him, "Chris, I have a bank account. That's it. I don't know anything about this, nothing at all about this sector." And he went, "No, it'll be fine." And actually, the interesting thing, wind the clock forward a few weeks, and I was actually in some of these senior meetings, having got my feet under the table, understand which way was up and all that sort of thing. And I was conscious that, the bank was paying for me as a Deloitte director, obviously not inconsequential fees. And that was it was definitely something I was thought, are they going to feel they're being ripped off here? I mean, are they conscious that I don't know anything about what they do? And actually, they were really good about, when we talked about it quite openly, they said, no, this is brilliant, because you've come from a totally different world at a senior level doing stuff. You're bringing a whole different set of perspectives without all the group think. And again, I think that's, from a leadership point of view, is such an important thing to expose yourself to, that you're freshening up your view a little bit, and you're getting a different set of perspectives, rather than just progressively becoming more and more myopic if you allow yourself to be totally stovepiped in your thinking.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, it was fun, that's for sure. It was really interesting in the end. I mean, talking specifically about leadership traits, when you in yourself, but also in others. I mean, what do you've mentioned a couple of things already around courage and so on, but what do you look for, and what do you expect from the people that are working for you as you've gone up the ladder?
Yeah, so there's a discipline. Again, many of the situations I was in, it was a turnaround. And it had to be done rapidly. I can remember one business that barely had enough cash to run the payroll the following month. These were hot situations. So it was around bringing together a high-performing team that's going to execute at pace with discipline, where performance management had to be of the highest order, where you don't get distracted. Um, uh, and that was the space, I think, where I had something to offer. There'd be other spaces where I wouldn't make a contribution in that sense. So turnarounds, focus, laser beam focus, joined up thinking where it all tick and ties and is synchronized. I wasn't one for blue skies and big ideas and leaving things loose. I like things kept simple and actionable, because time is short and you've got to do something with all this stuff. So make it simple and actionable.
Yeah, and what did you, I mean, in bringing your people on, when you're looking as a leader, looking downwards now, what did you do to kind of develop them, to get them the skills that you wanted to make the job most effective? How did you impart some of that?
Yeah, I found it actually. It was more than just an interest for me. I found it was part of my DNA. I'd spent some time at Lloyds Bank's Management Centre designing and delivering various management training courses. I always wanted to be the business sponsor in leadership pipeline development. Um, and I recognised, actually, when you're putting together your top team, you have to have diversity. You have to have people who are wired up in a different way. So, and I made a few wrong turns with some of that hiring, and I learned from that you have to have somebody who's going to have the courage to call out things that aren't tick and tied and synchronized. Um, but I would get very personally involved. I'd have a clear idea about what the overall mix needs to be. I also particularly like looking down through the organisation and bringing up quicker a younger generation. That sent out some nice signals around the business. It created a sense of restlessness, just to give younger people an opportunity in much bigger jobs than perhaps they might have expected, and give them the air cover that they deserve, so they can just flourish in that new situation.
No, I totally agree with that. And I think the interestingly reverse mentoring, bringing people up through the system where they're getting exposure early. I've seen that corporately, where I think it's worked really, really well, where people are brought in for a day or three to come and actually look at doing that, and invited not just to sit there and watch what goes on, but actually to comment and to have a view. But the other thing we used to do a lot in the military was, you had personal staff officers or military assistants who would work in senior roles. You'd have, an individual who'd be working for you very directly in it, and it wasn't a secretarial role at all. You'd tend to have a PA or something with you, but you'd have someone there who was literally the first filter for everything, chief of staff, if you like, that would be in all your meetings, would listen to your phone calls. And the benefit for them, of course, it wasn't just that they were saving you time, which they definitely did. I mean, it was very, very helpful. But the benefit to them was enormous because they went back into the organization with a completely different perspective of the higher sort of strata of the way it worked, and that in terms of furthering their own careers downstream was enormously beneficial. And if you look at a lot of very senior people in the military, they've all done those kind of jobs at some point because it's seen as such a pivotal thing.
Right. Yeah, that sounds super.
Yeah, it does works really, really well. Um, Looping back then to you as a young man, if you had all your time again and you wound the clock back to 1980, interestingly, I joined the Air Force in 1980 as well. So we all reflect a bit, I think, on this. But what would you be saying to young Mark if you were had your time again?
I'd be fairly pleased with the journey. I think I thought you might ask me this question, and then my first thought that came into my mind was, could I have taken more risks? As a leader, certainly come from a more cautious place, and I just wondered earlier, could I have taken? And then I reminded myself that actually some of the career choices I made were a little bit risky. Leaving on a secondment for 2 years. So you leave your host organisation and go into the central bank at a time where there were lots of issues in the banking industry in the UK to support the supervisors was pretty risky. But boy, the rewards were fantastic. I learned so much. I'd like to think I made a little contribution along the way. So I think on balance, I'm pretty happy actually that I did take a few risks as well as perhaps some things that are a little more straightforward.
Hmm. Okay,
I
interesting.
probably the other thought I've got is you go to university, you get your degree, then you fall into your professional exams, and I wonder if I could have taken a little bit of time away from working so hard at weekends on professional exams and perhaps branched out in other ways. But overall, Bob, I'm pretty cool and calm with it.
Yeah, nice. I mean, you're actually, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but having joined Deloitte and done that first financial thing, I ended up, funny old thing quite quickly as in the consultancy world as a Euro financial services guy, which hugely amused me. But quite a lot of people I talked to had very different, that had full careers in the finance world, but they'd moved organizations a lot. And a lot of the time they'd actually moved to get promoted because that was basically the way that it seemed to be operating with a lot of the big banks. Yet you stayed, largely, I mean, okay, with some movement around as you described in the same bank pretty much your whole career. Is that unusual?
No, at the time it wasn't. It would be now, of course. But that generation at that time, I think that's the way careers were put together. Sometimes I had to check the name of the organisation over the door because there was such a wide variety of roles. I was lucky enough to go from corporate banking to retail banking into some central functions. And then to wealth management and the private bank. It felt like different organisations each time, although the DNA was still green and blue.
Yeah, and well, interestingly, I think there's also, if you're looking from the outside in, as it were, into banking, it's a bit opaque to a lot of people. B, I mean, reputationally, I mean, we'll come on and talk about the sort of wider stuff in a while, but I think reputationally, when you look at banking, it hasn't got the best reputation from the point of view of the sort of fat cat salaries and all that sort of thing for a lot of people looking at it. But the thing that I think is really different to probably the perspective you've got is most people would look at, you're a banker, that's what you do, and it's whereas actually within that world there's obviously an absolute multiplicity of different aspects and professions and levels of expertise and specialist areas and all the rest of it, which I guess takes its own bit of navigating as well, right?
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. You described it as it was, and I think probably it started changing perhaps 20 years ago or so. Much more movement across the top of banks. Um, a lot of US hires coming across. A lot of changes then in the sort of touch and feel of banks. But certainly, I think what I had for the first 20 years was pretty much common across all the big banks in the UK at the time.
Nice, really, yeah, really interesting. I mean, it's great that it worked out so well for you from a career point. I do tend to talk to people about highs and lows and explore on their journey. I mean, everyone has them, and some are bigger highs and bigger lows. But when you before we sort of get into the specific highs, is there anything when you look back across it you would actually do differently yourself? And if so, what is it?
Well, I think, and this was, I don't know if low is quite the right word, but I can remember missing my numbers for a quarter. My scorecard was red for all sorts of reasons. And what I recognized was I didn't have a plan B. So a big learning for me was having options. You must always have a plan B and a plan C because sometimes plan A gets knocked. So things like making sure you got options and moving quickly,
Mm.
pace when things start to move from green to amber to red, you have to respond. So that was a key learning, and it was a painful one.
Yeah, and interesting on that, I agree with you completely on the plan A, B, C thing, but I think also jumping quickly to a plan B or a plan C if you need to. I mean, not kind of clinging on, going, oh, it's going to be all right. Because I think, having the courage of your convictions that, okay, we need to shift here is another important feature of that, isn't it? Which is not necessarily everybody's automatic response.
But yeah, absolutely right. This is where my piece around making sure everything tick and ties and is all wired up the right way. You have your corporate goals, you have a set of strategic themes, you have operational plans and budgets, you've got how you structure the place. You then appoint the right leadership team working in the right culture. It all ticks and ties. Um, that was a learning.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. What's the high point then, Mark? What's the
Well, I don't
your
know. I'm not one to be thinking about my high points. I mean, yeah, there were a couple of times where you take on a role, perhaps Lloyds Private Banking may have been this, where people say, "Do you know, are you really wise taking this on? It's not going to work. It's been tried before. There are some personal risks." And you dive in, and guess what? 1,000 days later, the business is knocking it out the park, and that felt good. Um, Other times it'd be where you take a bet on the younger generation who come through, and suddenly you get so surprised with how big they become in their new set of challenges. That really does land very well as well.
Yeah, it inspires a lot of loyalty in the people too, doesn't it? When you have faith in them, you empower them early, you give them an opportunity, and they really jump on it. And I think for I've had people like that as well, where they still talk to you in kind of you were the one that pushed me up the ladder here, and they really recognise it, which makes a big difference for sure.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right.
Yeah, fascinating. Those sort of turnaround roles, I think, are the hardest as a leader sometimes. I mean, on one level, I can see, because I've been in this situation myself, if you're taking over from somebody in a role who's done brilliantly and there's already set a very high bar, you're kind of going, oh God, it's going to be really difficult to make a difference here. But, at least you've got an organization that's flourishing and doing really well. On the other end, going into an organization that is not doing so well is obviously more of an opportunity, but it's also significantly more of a challenge from a leadership point of view. And that, I guess, that's depends on the way you're wired, whether that's your cup of tea or not. And clearly, it's your cup of tea.
Yeah, that's right. And the importance of having your board, your senior, the most senior leadership in the group, the exco, on board as well, because they can do three things for you. Once you're in their inner circle, that they can create budget for you, they can create a strategic direction for you, and really importantly, thirdly, they can create sponsorship. They're interested. They want to make a contribution, and that's very powerful.
No, 100%. What about I mean, sadly, pretty much for every high, there's got to be a low. What's your career low point?
Well, I think I touched on earlier. You're accountable, and you have a scorecard. And I remember going through a tricky period where some of that was red because we made a few missteps on launching a new service, and when you haven't got a plan B, so that can be a tricky time.
Mm.
But we got through it, and within I think 4 or 5 months, it was all a sea of green. So that felt very good. But you just got to find some resilience, a sort of what I would call a teak, tough tenacity, just to keep going and know you're going to come through the other side, and there'll be learnings from how we found ourselves in that sort of situation. So that was a situation.
Yeah, it's the age-old thing, isn't it? It's not how hard you fall, it's how quick you get back up. And I
Yeah,
think that that is really true in leadership roles because you are going to have these falls. Interestingly, again, apropos nothing, I suppose, but I was talking with someone the other day on a different podcast about education, where I do worry a little bit societally that we've gone sort of into a place where we're building, competitive's the wrong thing to do. We don't want to be competitive. Everything, everyone's got a chance. Everyone's got to be equal. We want to reward everybody equally. And the reality is, of course, life is competitive, and life is full of ups and downs and failures and successes. And I think if you're preparing people well for that in terms of life skills, you're going to give them a much better opportunity to be successful than if you're, going to make it a very hard landing for them when suddenly, life doesn't work out the way you thought it was going to.
yeah, you're absolutely right. And I guess just never forget it's just a job.
Mm.
As much as we're all committed to it and how it takes a major part of our lives and our energy, it's just a job.
Mm.
You actually always have options.
Yeah, that's true. And that's actually a great segue into the next question I was going to ask you, because you've had a very busy life in a very high stressful environment. I'm just interested in what you do personally. You mentioned rugby before, but de-stressing and relaxing and just giving yourself some kind of space away from work. What's your thing?
Also, I have a little rule today that the admin of the day gets done in the day. It just keeps me honest, and it means nothing is ever carried forward. And that's a little habit. I used to have all sorts of daily rituals in corporate world. At the end of the day, I would give myself 2 minutes to reflect on how I'd spent my energy during the day, and I would ask myself, have I been proactive or have I been reactive? Where would I plot my energy? And then I ask myself, have I been strategic or have I been tactical? And then I think, okay, is that okay? Or should it have been somewhere else? What changes do I need to make tomorrow to make sure I'm spending my energy units in the right place? Everybody has their own little rituals. So there were things like that. The much bigger answer also is this sense of balance: emotional, physical, psychological, spiritual, professional, personal, this wheel of life balance about the where you're going to be spending your energy, and looking after yourself, having what you eat, how you drink, how you exercise, all these things that we all know now. I was always quite good at. I kept myself honest on all of those things, and I just always tried to keep ahead as well in terms of what was going on in the market, any competitor moves, what that might mean for me and my business, just keeping edgy as well. I found there's a whole range of things, Bob.
Yeah, are you good at kind of leaving work behind and going, when you're in particularly in your corporate roles, could you sort of step away and say, right, I'm on holiday for the next 2 weeks, it's yours, or were you one of these people that constantly stayed on top of it?
I was probably in between. I'm much better now. I really am. But during that journey, I was probably, when I should have been fully off, I was probably half off.
Mm.
And what I learned is that if you're never fully off, it's difficult to be fully on. When the energy units aren't there, so it's really important you spend a period of time fully off.
No, I agree, and I think it is something I've seen a lot across my whole career, where some people are very good at it, some people are terrible at it, and I think in the corporate world there are, and obviously social media and email and phones and all the rest of it have made it harder because you've got such connectivity almost wherever you are, unless you've really taken yourself off into the wilderness. You're going to find it hard to cut off completely. But it's not, for me, it's also not just about you. And what I tend to say to people these days is you've got to think about your team. If you're constantly micromanaging, long screwdrivering, whatever description you want of it, and sort of reaching back into them even when you're away, then it's really difficult for them to, feel properly trusted, feel empowered, and actually to develop themselves. I worked for a guy, it was hilarious. He's a good friend. He's still a good friend. And he was my station commander when I was a squadron commander, and he had a reputation as a bit of a micromanager. He was going on leave for a week. He was going skiing. And I said, okay, I'll have a bet with you. I'll bet you £10 that you can't go the week away without actually calling me. And he looked at me with kind of horror, and he said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, you have a reputation that you're going to be constantly in touch." And I said, "I'll tell you if there's something I need to tell you, I'll tell you, and I'll call you. I know where you are, but basically go away, have a good week's leave, and I'll tell you about everything that went on when you get back." And there was a bit of a thinks bubble as this went through, and he went, "Okay, all right, I'll take that bet." And we got to, I think this was Friday, and he was going on the Saturday, and then we got to Wednesday or something, and we had an incident where I thought, okay, this might make the news. It wasn't a big deal, but it was an aeroplane that got airborne, had an engine failure, had to jettison its external stores, and the fuel tanks that you carry externally, blew up in a farmer's field and
Oh my
caused a
goodness.
fire. So it sounds dramatic, but it wasn't. It really wasn't that big a deal. But it was the I thought I better ring him up. And so I rang his mobile phone, and I'm not kidding. It rang once, and then he answered it. You kind of go,
Ah,
and I said, "So what were you doing? Were you standing at the side of the piece waiting for the phone to ring?" And he was, "Yeah, well, almost." And the and actually, then we talked about the incident, and he was then, "Well, what else is going on?" I said, "No, nothing you need to know about. I'll tell you when you get back." And I think it was quite a good lesson for him actually as well, because he definitely learned a bit from that. But I really was pushing the point because I think it's so important that if you're giving someone control of your train set, let them have control of your train set. Don't turn around and try and be the conductor from long range, which is an easy thing to do.
very true. And you're pointing to, I think, a common challenge or common condition that a lot of the very senior people that I support today in the world that I'm in is I haven't got enough time to get everything done. And the discipline of recognize, I said earlier, what is the job and what's not the job? What does success look like? Are you decluttering? The power of positive quitting. Are you saying no? And saying no is actually saying yes to a higher purpose. But many people haven't figured out what that higher purpose is because they're too busy being busy and recognizing you've only got 100 units of energy every day. So it's always trade offs. Are you spending them in the right place? And this idea of just slowing down, being optimistic, don't get isolated, have good daily disciplines, bring laser beam focus to the issues that need it, and also a sense that this is based on no research other than my observations, is that those big leaders probably have a 10-year golden period. It might be a bit more, might be a bit less, but when I look back over all this, it feels like that you're in that special place where you're making a difference. Your stock is high, you're doing great things, and the golden period's about, and it will come to an end. People think it'll go on forever. It will come to an end because stuff happens.
Mm.
Stuff happens to you personally, to the market, to competitors, to customers. It'll come to an end. So when you're in it, really, really enjoy it and make the most of every single moment and recognize there's going to come a time where, and it could be a cliff edge, where you're going to be transitioning to another place.
I think it's great advice. I mean, interestingly, I went to we had an away day session when I was in back end of my time in the military, so I was quite senior by that point. And we talked with one of the sessions during the day was a woman who was talking about stress management, and she said you've got to be so careful in the world you inhabit that you're not in the kind of work, die point, because everyone's going to die. But what you want to do is work, retire, die, not, just turn around and literally fall off a cliff, working yourself into an early grave. And I think that was, again, really sound because you can see people who, don't taper off when they get to retirement and just stop, which I think is a really bad thing, but also actually then, just continue thrashing themselves, unnecessarily hard for too long when actually everyone is sitting there in the sidelines going, as you say, end of your era, time for you to move on. Because I think that's great advice you're providing there.
Well, you've got to kick the habit of workaholism.
Yeah, for sure.
And, there's a lot of research that points to that for all of us, our decline in that professional environment comes much sooner than we think it does. And you've got to figure out how you leap to a new curve.
No, totally, totally. Hey, taking it away from you, I always sort of tap the personal experience of my guests where I can, and you got a load of this. I mean, we live in really challenging times. I mean, economically and sort of geopolitically. I mean, the government's challenge is obvious at the minute in terms of balancing the books and trying to look at prioritization across all the different things that they're coming under pressure for. But I think some of those things would be there regardless. I mean, the NHS is a great example if you're looking at the UK, where it doesn't matter which government's in power. This is a hugely problematic issue that they're really kind of unwilling to grip. I'm just interested. You've got a ton of experience, not least since you stepped away from the corporate roles into what you're doing now, as you mentioned at the start. What's your kind of prognosis? Are we kind of in just a dip period that we're going to emerge from, fairly smartly, or is the train coming down the tunnel with an oncoming beam in the face?
Well, I'm always an optimist, or always an optimist. We're smart, full of smart people doing smart things. And of course, artificial intelligence is opening up this fantastic new world for us all. Um, but my optimism is, I guess, a little tempered by all the challenges that we face. I thought you were going to ask me this, so I paid extra attention to my weekend Financial Times, and I thought I'd do like a Wordle. I'd try and pull out all the topics just in one Saturday morning's read. Well, you can guess what's on the list. White House Trump, tariffs, market reaction, Rachel Reeves budget, tax rises, the Oasis reunion, Edinburgh Festival, GB News, Gaza, Israel, Ukraine, Russia, um, mergers and acquisitions, Japan, Elon Musk, Disney, HSBC, trade wars, China and the Panama Canal, crypto and Swiss watches. You know, my, how do you fight your way through all of this fantastic stuff and still have a clear view of where you're going? I think we've entered a period of what I've heard other writers call the emotional labor of leadership, where leaders' agility and resilience it's never been more needed, where you have to suppress some private doubts to show a public confidence, and it's exhausting. So you've got to have tools to cope, because it is lonely and it's extraordinarily complex. You have things coming at you 24/7. How do you synthesize it all so you can exercise cogent judgment and make good decisions? You're always under the media spotlight, so you've got to get comfortable with that. It's not just press and radio and TV; it's of course the whole social media piece as well. So I think as optimist as I do see a sense of um, not quite exhaustion, but a need to go to many of the topics you've been talking about in terms of rebalancing.
Yeah, it's a really tricky time, isn't it? I think because some of these issues, I did a podcast the other day with Tom Tugendhat, and he was saying, there are only three ways the government raises money: it raises taxes, it borrows more money, or it cuts spending. And of course, none of those are very attractive to what they're doing. And and I think particularly with balancing across the books, if you're looking at health and welfare and education versus, I don't know, defense, national security, these are really challenging issues where you're trying to move massive amounts of money, GDP, across to to different things. And that is so politically toxic, it's really difficult. And set against that, you've got the kind of populist world, not just in the UK but elsewhere as well, driving on specific issues around. I mean, immigration in particular would be one in the UK at the moment, which is clearly, it doesn't matter which political party it is, whether it's Labour or the Conservatives, in terms of the big two, they're really threatened by that and the rise of reform in particular in the UK, and you see some of it in terms of what's happening in the US too, and I think it's scary to see how this ends. I agree with you about being optimistic. I think I'm like you. I'm inherently optimistic, but it is pretty challenging at the minute when you look at some of these things in lots of bits of the world where you go, wow. I mean, where do you go from here? I just finished reading Kim Darroch's book actually on his time. It focuses obviously a lot on his time in Washington. And he puts it over brilliantly, I think, when he talks about, if you're Mr. Middle America, or indeed you're in the UK before, at the time of the Brexit vote, and you're looking at the negatives of this and what your life looks like, and you're looking for a better life, and you're being promised the earth by politicians who've never delivered the earth, over many years past, you're potentially looking for an alternative is entirely logical. So I kind of see why we're in that space, but it is a wicked problem in terms of seeing your way out of it, I think.
It is, and the UK is not on its own. All the major economies around the world are faced with that set of very big challenges, and it needs a big dose of honesty and realism about it, in terms of you can't be going into one room where you're in the revenue generating workshop and come up with all these ideas, and then go to the next room where you're in the cutting budgets workshop, and pretend that they're not all connected, as if some magic is going to be sprinkled. You have to come down to a small number of initiatives. What they are, I don't know, but I am optimistic.
Yeah, nice. So switch text to the more sort of tactical level and banking. I mean, I think and you all have a really strong view on this, having spent your life in it, really. But I mean, when you look at the world of finance, personal finance, and the way it's changed, I mean, I just find it extraordinary now that, I mean, I'm in this space myself. I use my phone for more or less everything to pay for it. I don't use cash very much. I hardly carry any cash these days. Checks are pretty much, I hate it when someone sends me a check these days because it's such a pain to actually cash it. And just certainly for a lot of banks, finding an actual branch to go and visit is really, really hard. I mean, I just think, again, it's a challenge for a lot of people in the sort of the again, as I said, the base level of the world, if you like, who are just earning a living and working, how they're actually finding a way through this. What's your take? I mean, are we better off with some of this, or is it?
Yeah, so my optimism will show itself. I left the industry 16 years ago, and that was, like the ice age compared to the world we're in today. A bank's prospects are determined by macroeconomics, by markets, by model, and by margins and management. And after the financial crisis of 2008, banks are in good shape. Balance sheets are much stronger, better capital position, regulation is tight, and I think the digital developments are actually really terrific and exciting. And I'm like everything's done on the phone, and I don't like it when somebody sends me a check. In fact, I can't remember the last time sending me a check, but I get what you're saying. And it's really important that banks are profitable. Really important. I mean, would you like to keep your money in a bank that's not properly capitalized and losing money? You probably wouldn't. It's important they're profitable because they pay a lot of corporation tax, which finds its way into defence budgets and health and so on. They pay big dividends, which goes to pension funds and ends up in real pensioners' pockets. And they reinvest in their business. So they keep ahead on technology platforms, product regulation, IT resilience, cyber, and all of those things as well. So it's an important sector. The problem is that the industry has never been very good at explaining all of that. It should be on the front foot and be much more confident explaining why it's important we have robust, profitable financial businesses because of the benefits to wider society. You don't hear that commented on much.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think just a sort of onward track from that. If you got your crystal ball out and you were looking at where does this all end? I mean, I'm one, for example, that I don't know anything or really pretend to understand about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, etc. I look at the kind of continuation, as you say, with artificial intelligence. We also look at the threat risk that's and the threat firmament coming up in cyber hacking and organized crime that goes with that and everything else. So if you were casting the net forward maybe 5 or 10 years, where do you think we're going to be in the terms of world of personal finance?
Well, I think that a lot of the trends we've already been talking about will continue and probably accelerate. I think artificial intelligence, opens up opportunities to improve the customer experience. I mean, even on my banking app, I find almost every month there's some new functionality that's available to me that actually makes life easier. I think playing into banks' P&Ls and what it does for efficiency, and the important point you make about resilience, cyber, and all of those things, and how artificial intelligence can protect us all in that space. In terms of the types of businesses, everybody seems to be investing in wealth management. We've got larger middle class populations around the world, an appetite to obviously improve standard of living, and so playing into that space, perhaps not at the top end of uber high net worth, but that mass affluent space I think is really interesting and has been for a while. And then the things that are going on around corporate banking and markets and investment banking. So they're all going to be played out over the next period. And I think a continuation of the trends we're already seeing underway.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you mentioned pensions earlier. I mean, I think one of the areas that I think has got to be a kind of concern flag for the future is the whole pension sort of provision for people for several reasons. I think final salary pension schemes are almost a thing of the past. And if I look at the military example, a lot of people, me included, that was one of the big reasons for staying in, because the pension was really good. Now they've changed it to a career average pension scheme. I think we're going to see an awful lot of people who make a conscious decision mid-career maybe to step out and go and do something else because they need to turn around and make sure financially they're more secure by the time they reach a kind of age that they want to think about sliding towards retirement at some point. But I think the other thing is just the kind of security of what's going into pension pots and youngsters. I suppose I was like this for sure. I didn't care when I was 18, 19, 20, when I think that's worse now rather than better. And, I think there's a potential real challenge downstream in terms of where some of this comes from, particularly with the demography going the wrong way, which is obviously a factor for an awful lot of government spending as well. What do you think?
Yeah, I quite agree. I think this whole thing around intergenerational wealth transfer, we see the bank of mum and dad, but how you can move wealth down the generations is tricky territory, and I'm not quite sure that the industry has got some slick offering and process to actually. But then we see governments change, we see government fiscal rules change. We need lawyers in there, we need accountants in there. It's tricky territory, but I quite agree. We're getting older, populations are beginning to fall, wealth begins to move between generations, and sadly there'll be the haves and the have-nots.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. Last couple of questions, Bart, because I always ask these. What's the most memorable event of your career?
Memorable event of my career. I once fell off the back of a stage at the NEC in front of 3,000 people. When I was so I was pointing to a strategy model. It was a 2x2, very simple. And as I pointed to the box at the bottom right-hand side, I said, and this is the place we must not play in. And I fell off the stage. Everybody roared laughter. They thought it was part of the presentation. It wasn't. That the crew who had set the event up hadn't put any high-vis tape at the back, and off I went.
Oh my goodness! It weren't hurt.
Oh no, it was a good old drop, but it made me chuckle. It made me chuckle for a long way. Nobody forgot that. So that's a silly one. Look, I think the high points are some of those tricky, hot situations you find yourself in, and you found a way out, and you learnt a lot, and you were better for it. And there have been quite a few of those.
I can well imagine. And the very last question then is, what's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
Well, I had a feeling you were going to ask me that. I once took a set of very racy proposals to the main board at Lloyds, only to be asked by a non-executive, what's the bolder version of your plans? And I wasn't expecting that question. I've got to say, the whole of this conversation, Bob, would be my answer, because I'm quite private. I often prefer the spotlight to be somewhere else rather on me. And it's been delightful to spend so much time with you putting the spotlight on me. So that would be my answer.
Well, I hope it's not been too unpleasant.
Not at all.
No, Mark, it's been fabulous. You're a busy guy with an amazingly successful career. I've loved talking to you. Thank you very much indeed. You've shared some great insights, which are really, really helpful.
Pleasure to be along. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine. Thanks a lot. I really hope you've enjoyed this session with Mark Cheshire. He is, I think, a font of knowledge in terms of his experience and drive, very clear-eyed character in terms of what's good, what's bad, what's not, how to get things done in the most effective way. If you've enjoyed it, please share it. Please push it around your own social networks, like it, subscribe to the channels, comment, post, repost, all those sorts of things to help boost his visibility, the podcast visibility, etc. That would really, really help everything that we're trying to do here. If you find it valuable, then please consider adding value back to me by financially contributing to the show by either going to the support the show link in your podcast platform or going to www.patreon.com/leadingforlife, and you'll find the opportunity there to become a supporter, a champion, or a patron of the show. And that would mean a huge amount to me, to what we do to support the effort of this podcast. And it's just a way you can support us to continue doing it. So if you fancy doing that, and you fancy being helpful, then that would be really, really great. Thank you very much. Either way, though, as I always say, delighted to have you here, delighted to have you listening. I'm always really pleased when we've got a decent listener audience for the fantastic guests in particular that come on the show. And I really appreciate that. So thanks very much indeed. More soon, and have a great time in the meantime. Bye-bye.